I have been getting tagged in a great way on so many different posts on different social media channels, really around these terms of gut health. And as you start to have conversations with individuals, you start to realize, wow, we actually have very little idea of what some of these like gut health terms that we use and you see so frequently out on different social media channels, what do they actually mean? And also really making some tangible change when it comes to someone's gut health really does require us to understand just a little bit of what we're talking about. And so often like I said, get tagged in these posts, very, well-intentioned individuals. And they're like, well, if I do have gut health issues, like, what do? Do you just throw a probiotic at it? And I'm like, oh Lord, we have no idea what our gut health truly means. And that means we have no idea kind of the far-reaching impacts sometimes that our gut health has. And so welcome to today's episode of Learn with Lo. We're going to be diving into a brand new series this month that I really titled The Gut Health Terms That Everyone Uses But Few People Actually Understand. And so what I really want to dive into over the course of our next few episodes together is really understanding what do these terms mean that you hear about. Things like leaky gut, things like SIBO, things like probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics. What about things like, IBS and IBD? Like we hear about all of these different gut health terms, but a lot of times we may not truly understand exactly what we're talking about. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that because of that, you're going to be left kind of spinning in circles and you become pretty vulnerable in that situation to some of the ongoing trends out there, especially when it comes to, certain supplemental protocols or certain practitioner protocols. And I just want everyone to not be busier just running around managing their symptoms and truly understanding that something like gut health is so simple, I guess you could say, when you really start to understand the body as the body works. So like I said, over the next few episodes, we're really just going to have a conversation that to me, honestly, probably should have happened a long time ago. And this 3-part series is going to be some of the most commonly used terms that you hear out there in the social media kind of spheres around gut health. The ones that you see online, the ones that you hear your friends repeating, the ones that practitioners are repeating and sometimes building these entire super spendy protocols around. And yet somehow, some way, the physiology behind a lot of these gut terms, we really don't talk about nearly enough. And when that happens, then like I said, people don't necessarily get better. They end up spinning their wheels. And that's what I'm really passionate about is let's talk about it. Let's bring some really simple education to some of these terms to really make them everyday health language, because that to me is progress. Okay. We have to have people understanding and how to pay attention to their gut in a way that we didn't have the language for even 5, 10, 15 years ago, because clinically I'm kind of watching almost, like I said, the opposite effect happen. We're getting more and more of these kind of terms that are becoming more mainstream or more popular, right? Like I said, you hear about Candida and H. pylori and SIBO and IBS or Crohn's disease or leaky gut and food sensitivities. It's like the more and more popular that these terms become, the more incomplete the care behind them actually becomes as well too. So people are doing more, they're trying harder, they're stacking protocols, they're removing foods, they're adding supplements, and yet they feel like they're kind of circling some of the same problems and patterns over and over again. And that's because there's so many missing gaps and missing pieces of these conversations. So we're going to use this series as a good, educational aha, a really big reset, not to tear down some of these ideas because these terms are great. We have to understand these terms. The symptoms behind these terms are very real. The experiences that individuals are having with these types of diagnoses and terminology, it's very real, but we need to put them back into the proper physiological context, because once you understand what the body is doing and why the body is doing it, the confusion drops away, the fear drops away, and you become so much clearer on what that path forward is. So Today, what I want to do with our series and episode number 1 is I want to talk about a term that is becoming more and more popularized, especially on the social media and the functional health networks, and that is this term leaky gut. If you haven't heard leaky gut before, you probably will now, now that you, like I said, you kind of put this into your algorithmic sphere. But if you spent any time in the health space at all, whether as a patient or as a practitioner, you've probably heard the term leaky gut. You may have heard someone say, oh, I think I have leaky gut, or my provider told me that my gut lining is damaged, or I'm on a gut repair protocol, right? So the intestinal barrier is very real. Right? Very real. Intestinal permeability, or this concept behind leaky gut, very real. This is not a made up concept, but the way that it's kind of being explained, and more importantly, the way that it's being treated, has drifted pretty far away from the physiology that's actually driving it. And that's where people really start to get stuck, because leaky gut somehow has turned into this like quiet diagnosis, instead of understanding that this process of intestinal permeability or leaky gut, it's just that. It's a process. It's not something that you have. It's not something that you fix. It's not something that you heal. In reality, this is like a bigger sign of some of that barrier dysfunction that's going on. This did not happen overnight. There's not one food that caused your leaky gut. There's not one instance that caused your leaky gut. So there's not like one thing to fix. There's certainly not like one supplement to take. We have to understand that leaky gut is what happens as a downstream consequence of what was happening upstream. The gut lining does not just fail randomly. It is responding to kind of a perfect storm of events. And so I really want to dive a little bit into like making leaky gut feel like something that's easy to understand, because so many individuals are almost skipping that idea that this is a process, and they're trying to skip right to treating their leaky gut. Well, guess what? If you don't understand why the gut became permeable in the first place, you're just going to spin your wheels. You're going to just keep over and over again. Oh, I think I have leaky gut. I need to treat leaky gut. I need to take this supplement for leaky gut. And that supplement didn't work, so I need to take this supplement. That's not what it's about. We're asking the wrong question. The right question is we have to ask what is contributing to the leaky gut in the first place? What caused the gut to become permeable in the first place? Because otherwise you don't have your full solution and your full answers, and you're kind of just getting duped into this Band-Aid treatment, okay? So when you hear the term leaky gut, the first thing I want you to think about is your small intestine. So we have the stomach, we have the liver that houses the gallbladder, and right below that we have the small intestine. And then the small intestine is going to feed into the large intestine. So the small intestine is the section of the digestive tract that is responsible for absorbing nutrients. It's responsible for just passive absorption of the food that we digested at the level of the stomach. So once we're absorbing these nutrients, they become available to the bloodstream, where everything, like I said, else is contained then in the gut lumen, whether that's bacteria, toxins, partially undigested food, inflammatory compounds. Those types of things should stay in the gut lumen, and they should then be excreted out through our stool. But that small intestine is selectively permeable, okay? So the small intestine is really only the thickness of a paper towel. It's only one cell layer thick, and the small intestine then contains what are called these little microvilli. And these microvilli are these finger-like samplers that reach into the gut lumen, and they sample what's going by. They're like, oh, that's a protein. I'm going to open up and I'm going to let that into the bloodstream, and then I'm going to close off. If those microvilli are sampling bacteria and toxins and inflammatory chemicals, it shouldn't open. It should stay nice and tight through those tight junctions. What happens though, if the environment becomes inflammatory, there's too many bad guys, not enough good guys, there's a lot of poor digestion happening at the level of the stomach and the pancreas and the gallbladder, all of a sudden you start punching holes into the lining of the gut. So you almost envision like a piece of drywall in front of you, like a blank drywall. And these bacteria and these toxins and these inflammatory chemicals are punching holes in that drywall. And pretty soon, all of a sudden, those microvilli, they shrink. And all of a sudden they start to break apart. Now, instead of the small intestine lining staying intact and only letting some things in and keeping some things out, it's a free-for-all now, right? Bacteria, toxins, inflammatory compounds, they are allowed into the bloodstream just as much as the food is. And what happens then is with that intestinal permeability, it might start small, and then it can get bigger and bigger and more advanced to the place where we have a total body inflammatory response and full-blown autoimmune patterns. So this is what builds towards those full autoimmune disease states. You can have varying degrees of intestinal permeability or varying degrees of leaky gut. In my practice and with my holistic medicine mentorship program, where I train other practitioners, I talk about leaky gut in 3 stages. Stage 1 is what we call paracellular permeability, meaning that the cells of the small intestine walls, they should stand shoulder to shoulder and not let anything in. Over time, though, that can get damaged, and all of a sudden there's gaps or there's spaces between those small intestinal cells, and all of a sudden we become selectively permeable. So there's stuff getting in that shouldn't get in. So that's what we call stage 1 leaky gut. That's paracellular permeability. The tight junctions of the cells loosen. The spaces are going to widen up. Larger particles like undigested food, microbial fragments, they begin slipping through. And usually stage 1 is where you start to see food sensitivities. All of a sudden it's like, oh, is gluten bothering me? Is dairy bothering me? Are eggs bothering me? Is it soy? Is it almonds? Is it nuts? All of a sudden, like, we start to question some foods based off of those reactions. If we don't really answer the question and we don't recognize stage 1 permeability, it will progress to stage 2 permeability. Now, all of a sudden, it's not just the tight junctions have broke apart, but the small intestinal cells themselves become damaged and they actually split in half. This is called transcellular permeability. So substances now start to just damage the intestinal cells themselves. And this drives a lot of inflammation, a lot of oxidative stress, a lot of metabolic strain. And now all of a sudden, it's not just food sensitivities. Now we're getting this body-wide inflammation, whether it's chronic skin issues, chronic digestive issues, chronic pain, chronic inflammation, even neuroinflammation, memory issues, brain fog, you name it. Then if we don't recognize stage 1 or stage 2, it can progress all the way to stage 3. This is called lipopolysaccharide-driven permeability. Do you need to remember that? Nope. That's for my practitioners out there to remember that. But all of a sudden, with these lipopolysaccharides now involved, these come from gram-negative bacteria. Once those gram-negative bacteria have entered circulation, the immune system is involved now. All these inflammation rises, and at this point, it's a full gut lining conversation, or it's not just a gut lining conversation. Now it's an entire immune system and inflammatory cascade conversation. So really what matters most is understanding that the small intestinal barrier lining, it is not super thick. It is just one cell layer thick. It's the thickness of a paper towel. And due to multiple different factors, we can start to create intestinal permeability or damage there. But we have to understand that the leaky gut is not the root cause. The leaky gut is a downstream consequence of what has caused it to become damaged. So what we really need to ask is, what is the barrier responding to? What's in this environment? Is there poor digestion? Is there microbial imbalance? Is there chronic stress signaling? Is there an inflammatory load? Is there nutrient depletion? Any one or all of these forces can really damage that overall cell wall. And if we are just trying to come in with leaky gut protocols and removing foods, or I'm going to take colostrum and L-glutamine and zinc and collagen to repair my gut lining, all you're doing is putting some spackle on those drywall holes. And then every day the same things are punching it back open. And then you try to put some spackle, and then the same day, everything tries to punch back open again. What are we doing? We are spinning our wheels. If you are trying to skip the investigative step of asking, why is my gut leaky in the first place? And you want to try to skip to fixing it, it's not going to work. You're going to spin your wheels and waste a lot of time and a lot of investment. So the assumption is, oh, let's just patch the barrier and all of the systems resolve, but you cannot spackle drywall while something is still punching holes through it. And barrier repair without addressing these underlying factors just becomes Band-Aid support at best, if it is even going to make a noticeable difference. But no lasting change and a lot of wasted time and a lot of wasted money in my aspect. So that's because the upstream system was never stabilized. No one ever asked, why and how did you develop leaky gut? Let's take those features out, and then we can come in and repair the barrier. But I can't repair the barrier as long as it keeps getting damaged day after day because we haven't changed the terrain yet. So this is where, with the lowdown holistic medicine methods, we kind of diverge a little bit into a whole different mindset because it's much more effective. We don't just start with patching the lining. We start with identifying what is destabilizing the gut environment in the first place. So we're going to be looking at digestive dysfunction. We're going to be looking at your microbial balance. We're going to be looking at your bile and your liver dynamics. We're going to be looking at stress physiology, inflammatory drivers. When those stabilize, and everybody is different, that's why it requires an investigation. When those stabilize, the barrier often stabilizes itself. Not because it was forced to, but because all of a sudden the conditions that caused it to be damaged in the first place are no longer active. And that shift from really just treating the lining to truly treating the terrain and treating the environment, that is the difference. That is like, my mind can't unsee that, right? Because that is the difference between just treating like short-term symptoms for someone versus long-term gut stability and putting those food sensitivities and autoimmune patterns into full remission. That to me is success, right? So this is just where you kind of make the shift, the mindset shift, where you can anchor into the intestinal barrier does matter. Don't get me wrong. Leaky gut is real. Intestinal permeability is real, but it's rarely the starting point. It's telling me what has been the downstream consequence of upstream dysfunction. So instead of asking, how do I fix leaky gut? The more useful question becomes, what is causing the intestinal lining to become damaged in the first place? And that is where we start our approach and start our treatment. So if this conversation resonates with you, it's because you've probably already started to question and feel the limitations of the current models that you've been exposed to, of either through conventional gastroenterology or even other like functional medicine providers that don't understand this physiology forward education and are still trying to treat the downstream symptoms versus really understanding how to reverse the terrain that created that imbalance in the first place. So this is what my holistic medicine methods looks like in practice. It's not flashy, it's not extreme, it is intelligent, it is grounded in physiology, and it's very responsive because that's how the body works, right? And when you see that, you can't unsee it anymore. So if this sounds like a story, like I said, around this leaky gut that you've been curious about exploring for yourself, or you feel like you have a friend or a family member that fits a lot of these, like I said, food sensitivities, systemic inflammation, chronic skin issues, chronic gut issues, autoimmune patterns building, send them this episode, because no doubt that leaky gut is definitely part of their pathophysiology at this point, but also that's not their starting spot. And anyone that kind of tries to do that for them might just be putting another Band-Aid on their symptoms. So if this is you, head to the link in my bio. That will take you to my quick links page where you can get access to a consult together. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter. You can jump into some self-guided education right into my Master Your Metabolism Masterclass. And regardless, we can really get you honed in on that holistic medicine methods to get the best care possible.